Hello and welcome to this episode of India and the World on DeKoder. I'm Nidhi Razdan. So we've got a pause, as it were, in this war in West Asia between the United States and Iran. But does that mean that the economic shock that the world and indeed India faced is actually over? That's one thing. But there's also a bigger question at play here. How exactly is the Indian economy doing? What are the numbers we should believe? And what is the true state of affairs? There's no better person to answer those questions than the former Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, Dr Montek Singh Ahluwalia, who in his capacity as a senior bureaucrat has overseen many economic reforms in India in the 90s, seen India through many crises at that time, and is perhaps the best placed to answer these questions today. Great to have you on our program, sir.
No, thank you for inviting me to your show.
My first question really is related to this war in West Asia or the Middle East. How do you think India has handled things at this time in terms of the fuel price hikes, the fact that fuel shortages were not widespread? Do you think we handled it all right?
I think it went off quite well, quite honestly. I mean, one of the key things is that the crisis didn't become as bad as people thought. And that's possibly because relatively early in the day, there was some kind of an expectation that things would settle down. Although uncertainty remains. I mean, even today, the President of the United States says things are okay, but if they're not okay, I'm going to start bombing again. So there is uncertainty. I think what we did, the way we handled it made a lot of sense if you say that this is going to be a temporary break. And it was a temporary break. So I think by and large what we did is the right thing to do. Now it did have a shock. There was some disturbance, but not too much.
In terms of lessons to be learned, though, from this crisis and to prepare ourselves for the future, what would you say are some of the big things to take away from this, especially in terms of India's oil basket, since we depend so much on imports?
No, quite clearly the lesson, not just for oil, but actually nowadays everything, is that you better have diversified sources of supply. Because concentrated risks, what they call choke points, could create a problem. So two things. One, diversification. Second, and that's in some ways more important, the level of our strategic reserves was too low. And it just happened that in this particular case, the crisis was a global crisis. There was a shortage everywhere, and the international strategic reserves were being used. But it's possible that we might face a crisis that just affects us. So for that, you can't necessarily rely on international reserves. So we need much larger Indian reserves under Indian control. And that basically means building up storage capacity in different parts of the country.
Is that something that could take decades to actually do?
No, I don't think it'll take decades, but it'll take money. So, we have to have the resources to do it. If you give it priority, it just means you've got to fit this into your overall sense of what the country has in terms of resources and what are the priorities. I think this is understood now, and many people say that we're going to do it, so that's good enough, I think.
Looking, though, at the overall state of the Indian economy today, there is a very ambitious target that the government of India has set of 2047 into making India a developed economy. And I think we're growing at about 6-7% at the moment. Is that enough for India to reach that target by 2047?
Well, we're growing at about 6+%, okay? It becomes 7 only if you start counting from the bottom of the COVID pit, so to speak. 6.5, that's roughly where we are. Is that good? It's been our long-term growth now for quite a long time, okay? So in that sense, you might say that's, as they say, we're like that only. For the last 20 years, it's 6.5. Is it better than other countries? Most emerging market countries and developed countries have been growing slower. China has also slowed down below 6.5. But of course, they grew very rapidly and then slowed down. So in that sense also, I think we're doing reasonably. But we're definitely not growing at the target set. Because if you're serious about the target of Viksit Bharat by 2047. Now, exactly what growth rate is needed varies depending on how people calculate it. But I think most people agree that in constant prices, you need an average growth rate of a little over 8% from now to 2047. That's one point. But when you talk about an average over 20 years in which the country moves from being just bottom end of the middle income to the top, to the bottom of the high income, there'll be an inevitable slowing down, which happens as the country becomes more sophisticated. So our average should be calibrated around a much higher growth rate in the first 10 years and a slower growth rate later. So if you convert the 8% target, that your reference target for the next 10 years is, let's say, 9%, allowing for a slowing down in the remaining period to an average of 7%, then 6.5 is nowhere near 9. And that difference is what we have to do. Now, I think everybody agrees that business as usual will not get you to Viksit Bharat. I mean, that's why the Prime Minister frequently says, we need more reforms, and he used the phrase reform, perform, transform. I think those are the right slogans. What we now need to do is, what exactly do we mean by reform and when are we going to do it? And that's the design of the reform.
So which was my next question, which is that he says we need reform, but he has the answers. So my question is, do you think the government has shown enough political will to push through what are economically perhaps good decisions but politically risky ones?
Well, that's always a problem. But let's put it this way. The government is politically very strong and the Prime Minister is very popular. So quite honestly, if in this environment we can't do it, then I don't see how we're going to do it. Now, it's always possible that there are some things in a list of, let's say, 20 things that need to be done. There'll be some things that are just too difficult to do now. So you postpone those. But if you identify a list of, let's say, 20 priorities, it should be possible to do 4 or 5 of them within the next 6 months.
But what do you think continue to be the things that hold us back today? For instance, when we talk about the ease of doing business, again, investors will tell you that, it's better than before, but it's still quite a task to get things up and running on the ground here. There is there are complaints about tax terrorism, bureaucracy, red tape.
I have no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I mean, look, the government, and I've said this many times, the government set up a committee under, I think it was Rajiv Gauba, who was the former cabinet secretary and then a member of the Niti Aayog, and he's the only member of the Niti Aayog who's been continued after the revamp of Niti Aayog, to do a study on how do we improve the ease of doing business. And the study had a lot of other people, like Manish Sabharwal and other outsiders, all of whom have talked and have sensible ideas on how to do it. Now, one item that they picked up was quantitative control orders, which I think are really an abomination. Okay. Now, Gauba listed about 700, so I'm told, quantitative control orders. That report is not public, so I'm just reporting what I heard in newspapers. But the facts are that having identified 700, so far only 109 have been got rid of. Now, I would say a decisive way of reacting to this and showing we're serious would be to get most of those done. Okay, maybe 10% no, even 20% no. But if you could say, let's say a month from now, that this very high-level committee identified 709 quality control orders, which is really a form of license permit Raj. That's what it is. Yeah. And they've got rid of 500 of them, I would applaud. But I think we have to get rid of another 400 to get there. So that's a very simple example. But I think the general point which people are missing is that the ease of doing business is less of a problem for large established industries because they impose a fixed cost. These guys have all the resources needed. They have a staff that looks after these things. But if we really want India to flourish, if we want startups, which we are rightly emphasizing to do well, These are not guys who are very clever about how to get permissions. You need to get rid of this big time so that small and middle industries don't get hurt. And I think most of these things like quantity control orders, etc., they hit the small and middle industry big time. And I think we need to correct that.
There's also an impression that, there's an environment in the country today where certain business groups or industrial houses get favored over others. Does that create, in your view, an unfair environment then to encourage private investment?
I hear that a lot, and I mean, I understand it. Look, around the world, this is not just an Indian phenomenon. One of the reasons why there is a bit of a loss of confidence amongst people around the world about the, if you like, efficiency characteristics of capitalism is that many industries get dominated by a few entrepreneurs or companies, which then exercise a huge amount of monopoly power and also have disproportionate political leverage. I mean, look at the United States and you'll see the story. But, I think we shouldn't convert this into being generally anti-big companies. What we should do is, where a company is big, it should be disciplined by being subjected to much greater competition. I mean, that's the only thing industry will actually understand. And for example, let's say people who produce things like metal, and aluminum, and steel, and petrochemical stuff, man-made fiber, and that kind of thing. Now, at the moment, we have quite high duties on these. These are things that are actually bought by middle and small industries for their production. The rupee is depreciated 12%. That's good because it enables us to become more competitive. I think we should just reduce duties on these items which are produced by the big guys at one go, maybe by 10 percentage points. That'll be a huge benefit to the small and middle. And believe me, if we've learnt anything from the 1991 reforms, it is that when you subject industry to competitive pressure, it responds. If you don't subject it to competitive pressure, don't be surprised that they just sit back on their haunches and enjoy themselves.
Well, I can give the example of flying in India, domestic airlines. You pretty much have a duopoly right now, or telecom, which is again reduced to that. So I think when there's lack of competition, we as consumers are the ones who take the hit for that. You mentioned the depreciation of the rupee. And again, there's been a lot of political debate around that, even economic debate about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. You said it's a good thing. I interviewed Arvind Subramaniam some weeks ago, and he was of the view that this depreciation signaled a more fundamental problem with the economy and in terms of investor confidence in India. And this predates the war. Part of it had to do with this crisis, but a more structural issue that predated this. So can it be both, what you're saying and what he's saying?
I'll tell you, I agree with Arvind in this respect, that what triggered the depreciation, even before the crisis, because the depreciation has been going on for a little more than a year now, what triggered it was the reversal of capital flows. But I give credit to the governor of the Reserve Bank that seeing the reversal of capital flows, he allowed the currency to depreciate without intervening. And the reason for that is that the currency had appreciated in real terms. This is not a concept that the newspapers, well, some of the pink newspapers mention it. But, if you have a stable nominal exchange rate between the rupee and the dollar, and Indian inflation is much higher than dollar inflation, then in real terms, it's the same thing as your currency appreciating, because your goods become more expensive in dollars than the dollar rate of inflation. So I think it's true that the depreciation was triggered by the reversal of capital flows, which kind of began in 24. But I give credit to the management allowing it to happen. They should have done it even earlier because our export performance has been very bad. It's improved a bit in the last few months. But, for the last 4 or 5 years, exports as a share of GDP have been falling, goods exports in particular. And I think we needed a little bit of a boost of competitiveness. What I mentioned now was for middle and small industries, that when the rupee depreciates, I don't see why we don't lower the duties on the kind of things produced by the big guys. Because they should be able, because, I mean, they don't need an extra boost against imports of a duty remaining high when import prices are going up because of the exchange rate change. So they should have been put under pressure.
You have actually been emphasizing this issue of exports and the need for India to do better with exports and be
Yes.
more competitive with, say, Vietnam and China, which we're not being able to do. What would it take to change that, in your view?
Oh, there's a lot. There's a lot of things. I mean, look, some of those things are not related to trade policy. I think one of the big problems is that exports are the result of the competitiveness of the economy, and unfortunately, in every country, people think exports are the result of the ministry that deals with exports and the policy they follow. They aren't. I mean, the most important thing is much better infrastructure, much better logistics, ease of doing business in the sense of clearing permissions to bring things in, bring things out, better sort of supply of related raw materials. I mean, if we were to produce clusters for middle and small industries, where the kind of support that middle and small industries need would be available nearby, you'd produce a much more productive industry. And that's what the Chinese do. I mean, in particular areas, everything that a particular product needs is available, readily available. So I think all of these things need to be done. But, you know, exchange rates matter and duties matter.
I'm going to quote another economist now, and that's Surjit Bhalla, who again created a flutter with his argument recently that there is a deep state in the government of India that's allowing this government to convert this crisis during the war in preventing them from carrying out basically economic reforms when they could have. So do you agree with him that there is some kind of deep state? Is he referring to the bureaucracy? Who do you think he's talking about?
You know, I mean, he's the most quoted economist in the country, his good friend. And I mean, I've said to him that nobody quite understands what you mean by the deep state. But yes, he means the entrenched bureaucracy. He believes that the government actually wants to do these things and is being prevented from doing it because the bureaucracy doesn't want it done. Now, I don't necessarily want to endorse that view, but it's certainly true they're not being done. I mean, the example I gave you, Mr. Gauba's committee made, to my mind, recommendations which could be accepted straight away.
Yeah, and that's only been partly done.
But whether, I don't know, very partly, because if it's 709, you do 100 of them. And by the way, this is not just an external committee. This is a committee set up by the government, tasked with doing an ease of business set of recommendations. The guy at the level of Minister of State, as a member of the Niti Aayog, he's consulted with all the relevant people. So what is it that prevented those recommendations from being accepted?
It comes back to political will.
Well, that's, I mean, what Surjit's view is that somehow the bureaucracy manages to prevent things from happening. That's what he's, but
you don't necessarily buy that.
Well, I mean, look, I've been a bureaucrat myself, and I think where the politicians are clear, I don't think the bureaucrats obstruct them. So, I mean, for example, if the government is clear that Gauba's report needs to be done,
it can do it.
1 week.
Again, related to this, Arvind Subramaniam had also recently argued that there was a need for a change of personnel. And when I asked him what he meant from ministers to bureaucrats, because there was what he believes a drift in decision making when it comes to the economy. So do you think that perhaps time has come to shake things up, at least at the bureaucratic level?
Look, I think this boils down to what Arvind Subramanian is saying is that he wants the PM to do a shake-up, okay? I mean, that's the PM's prerogative. I like to think that if you have a politically strong government, and you have a strong PM, there's no question about it, I think he just has to take the decision. Whether he does it by shaking X or Y, the bureaucrats or the ministers, that's really to be left to him.
There's also a debate, Dr. Ahluwalia, about welfare schemes / freebies elections and the impact that is having on our finances. Where do you stand on this debate? Do you see them as freebies or as welfare schemes to begin with? Because how you frame this is also
No, it's a
important.
tough one. Look, I mean, for example, I think the rural employment program, that's not a freebie. In my view, it's a very important part of the welfare system, particularly for rural areas. I mean, for example, right now we've got the El Nino. That's another, almost certainly a negative factor. And it's going to be a negative factor that's going to affect the rural areas. So actually making sure that that scheme is properly functioning would be a very important part of welfare. There are other things that are just pure freebies, in the sense that you just say, I'm going to give X amount of money to X kind of people. Frankly, I feel that we do need stronger welfare systems. We have an ad hoc welfare system. I mean, the essence of a welfare state, in my view, is good quality free education for the public at large, good quality free health for the public at large, and you can have separate private institutions where people pay and maybe get what they think is better. But these public institutions should be good. This means they should be adequately funded, but more importantly, the governance should be such that the funding is properly used. And we are hopelessly weak on that. This is not a central government issue, it's a state government issue, because schools and primary health care are all in the area of the state government. The very same state governments all over the world of different parties are also handing out freebies. So you're in a position where in many states, retired university professors don't get their pensions paid, but on the other hand, some new freebies introduced. I think governments have to be frank with the public. When they introduce a freebie, how is it going to be paid for? I think there's nothing wrong with saying that, look, I think the poor are in deep difficulty, so I'm going to give this benefit, and this is how I'm raising the funds, which could only mean either you raise more taxes, or you cut some expenditures, or you sell some public sector assets.
But be honest and transparent.
Yeah, but what's happening is that people are announcing freebies, and what they're doing is postponing expenditure, which just means complete deterioration in whatever services exist.
Finally, Dr. Ahluwalia, you mentioned right at the beginning that if India wants to achieve its target of being a developed economy by 2047, it will need to grow at plus 9% in the next 10 years and maybe a little slower after that. We're at 6.5. Therefore, considering that our next general election is in 2029, is this, in a sense, a now or never moment in terms of taking those steps for reform for this government?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think some of the big macro things that need to be done are very clear. Clearly, you need more investment. And I would say that it ought to be private sector investment. I don't mean just the 2 or 3 big guys. I mean private sector across the board, including the middle and the small. And you need to find out what's holding up that investment. If what is holding up that investment is inadequate work on improving ease of doing business, let's give that absolute top priority. It's the kind of thing that could be done within 6 months if you can overcome the local bureaucratic resistance. So that's one. I think the other thing we do need to do is a much, much better export performance. I mean, quite frankly, to be beaten by Vietnam and Bangladesh, you can always find reasons for it. And these countries deserve credit for doing well. I'm not trying to be dismissive.
But we can do much better.
But, I mean, it just means we're asleep at the wheel. And you need to be clear, why is this not happening? Third, you definitely need foreign direct investment. I mean, look, our whole strategy of attracting supply chains, I mean, when it works, like, for example, the smartphone, Apple, the Foxconn thing, it's worked very well. Now, why can't we have 5 more such things? To my mind, we should be able, in the next year or so, to demonstrate that we can actually do it. And a piling up of such successes will change the atmosphere.
So I guess the next year becomes particularly crucial then, and the headwinds, as you said, from geopolitical challenges are not quite yet over. So it's a challenging
time. Not at all. And it's not just political challenges. There are technological challenges. I mean, the growth of artificial intelligence is going to affect job creation. Let's be not just in India, everywhere.
Yeah, it's already happening.
It's already happening. And what will happen is new jobs will be created, yes. But some of the vehicles that people have thought of as getting into the more prosperous middle class, they'll certainly get choked off. And now, how much development there is in bringing in the new kind of stuff, that is uncertain. And the thing is, this is an area where policy is changing, not policy, but the environment is changing incredibly rapidly. Look, it took 15 years, I think, for the internet to reach 1 billion people. And it took 2 years for ChatGPT. So things are changing at a rate which is infinitely faster than it was when the 91 reforms were done. That's when the internet came, okay? So the question is, are we moving that fast? And I believe we didn't move fast enough in 91. I don't regard 91. I think 91 was a very important change. But looking back, whenever I've had the chance, I've said we should have gone twice as fast. Today, the pace at which we respond has to be that much faster.
Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to have you on the show with us. And let's hope that someone's listening to some of the important points you have raised on the state of the economy.
I'm sure DeKoder has a big audience, so I hope they're enjoying it.
Yes, we hope that the audience is certainly listening. Thank you, and we'll see you again next week. Goodbye.